Investigators stood frozen outside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson residence. Local authorities reported glaring signs of a forced entry, but evidence suggested a much darker truth waiting inside. Detectives believed the 84-year-old mother of television anchor Savannah Guthrie was violently abducted from her sanctuary. But the real nightmare was only just beginning. Deputies scoured the brush outside. Nancy was last seen late Saturday night by her daughter and son-in-law. They drove her home after dinner. But something wasn't right. Let this terrifying reality sink in. An 84-year-old grandmother had the life-saving pacemaker keeping her heart pumping ruthlessly ripped from her chest. It was discarded like garbage, leaving a chilling void. Security cameras smashed. Crimson smeared the floors. By dawn, she was gone. Here is the terrifying twist. The last person to see her alive refuses to speak. He controlled her finances. He deliberately shut the garage door on the security camera hours before she vanished. When detectives finally interrogated him about that fateful evening, he made a classic, highly suspicious move. He lawyered up, staying silent. February 1st, 2026, Tucson. Nancy Guthrie vanished from her residence. 0 witnesses. Just a cryptic ransom demand, a crimson trail, and a son-in-law guarding a very dark secret. Federal authorities released chilling footage of a masked phantom prowling. A $50,000 reward generated 0 leads. Because in this twisted investigation, the central mystery isn't where Nancy went, but exactly who erased her. The horrifying answer might lurk much closer to home than anyone dared imagine. This case has America asking one question. How do you solve a crime when the only witness stays completely silent? How do you find justice when every forensic clue points toward an unthinkable betrayal? If you are brand new here, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on those notifications. We will never stop until the truth surfaces. Returning viewers know the drill. Let us work. Nancy is still missing, and somebody holds the terrifying map. Before dissecting her brutal disappearance, we must understand the vibrant woman Nancy truly was. This wasn't another statistic. She had deep roots, a vibrant life, and connections that thrust this nightmare into the national spotlight. Nancy was 84 years old. Born Nancy Slingerland, she matured in a classic America where neighborhood loyalty meant everything. She wed Charles, building a solid existence in Tucson. He was a chemist. Nancy thrived in university administration, forging her own formidable legacy. Wealth eluded them. Fame bypassed them, yet they remained fiercely dependable. Then, in 1988, Charles died. Widowed at 46, Nancy refused to surrender. She embraced life, becoming a deeply beloved fixture at St. Philip's Episcopal Church. She volunteered relentlessly every Sunday. The community became her ultimate lifeline. Above all, family remained paramount. Nancy proudly raised 5 children. Daughter Annie married a man named Tommaso Cion. We will revisit him shortly. Just understand this. Nancy was never isolated. She was constantly surrounded by family, people who were absolutely sworn to protect her. But one haunting medical detail elevates the dread. Nancy relied completely on a mechanical pacemaker. Removing it meant certain death. Her attacker fully comprehended that terrifying vulnerability. They knew her survival demanded that machine, yet took her regardless. Entering early 2026, Nancy occupied her longtime Tucson residence. Aging couldn't break her fierce independence. She constantly attended services and regularly hosted family. Her son-in-law, Tommaso, wielded absolute authority over her financial accounts. This standard setup typically protects aging relatives. On the surface, the dynamic appeared completely harmless. Yet a sinister storm gathered out of sight. It soon detonated into modern history's most perplexing vanishing act. When shadows fell on February 1st, 2026, Nancy evaporated, transforming her 84-year legacy into a crime scene. Let us examine the preamble, because glaring clues already existed. Investigators simply failed to connect the deadly dots. January 28th, 2026. Exactly 3 days prior, an anomaly occurs. Tommaso, her financial guardian, executes a deeply suspicious move. He seals the garage bay. You might dismiss this as utterly mundane. People secure barriers daily. Context is everything. Nancy owned a porch camera, meticulously documenting every outdoor movement. Lowering that specific metallic shield completely blinded the digital recording lens. It severed the solitary technological witness capable of exposing those grim final hours. Innocent coincidence? Coincidences always pile up in cold cases. Let's rewind the clock. In the days before February 1st, Nancy's daily rhythm was completely predictable. She never missed Sunday church. She kept her family incredibly close. Every step was measured. At 84, a pacemaker kept her heart beating, demanding absolute caution. Her loved ones constantly checked in. Tommaso was always around. Living down the street with Nancy's daughter, Annie, he was a permanent fixture. He balanced her checkbook. He ran mundane errands, doing exactly what good families do for aging mothers. But that was the first mistake. Case files confirmed Tommaso quietly steered her financial ship for years. He accessed her accounts. He held ultimate power of attorney. Millions of trusting families use this exact system, totally blind to massive systemic failures. A totally normal setup, until you witness the ensuing devastation. January 31st, 2026. Exactly one day before Nancy vanishes, neighbors spotted her routine walk. Zero panic. No frantic calls for salvation. She was entirely safe at home, or so her trusting community believed. But when darkness fell, everything violently shifted. The nightmare remains hidden. Security footage is completely absent. The garage door stayed locked. We lack any witnesses. But the haunting silence speaks volumes. By dawn, Nancy Guthrie would cease to exist, and evidence suggested this horrific disappearance was never random. It was a calculated trap. Investigators eventually untangled the wreckage. In the agonizing hours before Nancy slipped away, unnatural movement disturbed her property. Footsteps, malicious preparation. The Phantom knew her blueprint. They mapped out the cameras, perfectly aware of her 84-year-old routine and ticking pacemaker. Opportunistic criminals break windows. This strike was chillingly precise, and Tommaso was the absolute last person looking. Let's be perfectly clear. Catching that final glimpse doesn't instantly brand you a killer, but it firmly anchors you as critical. You hold secrets the dead cannot share. In this fragile hunt, those memories are the sole bridge between saving Nancy and burying her ghost forever. Yet, when desperate detectives came knocking, pleading with Tommaso to retrace her fading hours, begging to know if Nancy had been afraid or confused, desperate for names of enemies who might want a grandmother dead, he refused to cooperate. He completely dodged interviews. Zero alternative theories. He immediately lawyered up and slammed the memory vault shut, leaving us drowning in agonizing questions. What shadows crept inside during those final days? What did Tommaso witness? What awful truth? Why would the only lifeline for a missing 84-year-old grandmother choose absolute silence? It all circles back to the devastating cold open. February 1st, 2026. The definitive moment Nancy Guthrie's world violently collapsed. Depending on the whispered theories, it was either a brutal abduction or a flawlessly staged vanishing act. Case files outline an unsettling timeline. Tommaso summons a rideshare. The final destination is Nancy's house. He arrives during the twilight. Evidence suggested an arrival around 7 or 8 in the evening. Though that exact timestamp remains a toxic secret, he paints a picture of a totally normal family visit, eating dinner, catching up, doing the right thing, but his fragile alibi truly splinters. Behind those drawn curtains, the absolute truth of those hours belongs to only two souls, Tommaso and Nancy. Only one remains to weave the tale. The other was completely erased. Detectives stitched together a specific window of time. Tommaso lingers inside Nancy's walls for hours. They share dinner, converse quietly. A perfectly domestic illusion. Then, deep into the bitter night, Tommaso exits. He calls another car, heads back home, leaving Nancy utterly defenseless. This exact sequence is the twisted spine of the cold case. Tommaso is the last verified sighting. The second his vehicle pulls away, a suffocating silence drops over the house. Zero phone calls, zero texts. She completely ghosts her beloved children. She ignores her friends. A vibrant woman simply fades into a black hole. Then the true horror drops. Sometime early on February 2nd, the unthinkable happens. We lack the exact minute. Investigators lack a concrete digital timestamp. But somewhere in that dead zone between midnight and dawn, a monster breached Nancy's sanctuary. Their next move was atrocious. Her very life source, The tiny pacemaker keeping her elderly heart beating was completely severed, violently ripped from her chest. The machine was tossed onto the floor like worthless garbage, but Nancy needed it. Stripped of her device, her failing heart became a ticking time bomb. The indoor security cameras, utterly obliterated. The Phantom refused to leave a digital footprint. They stalked the hallways, ripping down lenses with terrifying ease. Random burglars never hunt like this. This killer possessed an intimate blueprint. Then there's the blood. A crimson trail painted a haunting path to the back door. No massive gore, just enough droplets to prove a desperate, painful injury. Evidence suggested an elderly woman fought back against the shadows, more than enough to freeze blood. The rear entrance stood completely ajar, swinging freely in the breeze. It looked like a panicked escape or a forced extraction, yet one specific anomaly still terrifies everyone. Nancy's loyal canine remained completely silent. This was an aging widow's fierce protector, an animal practically wired to sound the alarm against any approaching threat. Absolute quiet swallowed that darkness, pointing toward a truly horrifying reality. The attacker was a familiar face, or they possessed chilling skills to pacify a guard animal. When dawn finally broke, Nancy Guthrie had vanished. Her life-saving heart device lay discarded. Surveillance equipment was totally pulverized. Dark crimson stains decorated the hallway. Only a single individual could possibly explain the terrifying window of time right before disaster struck: Tommaso Cione. Panicked relatives desperately tried contacting her throughout the following afternoon. Rings echoed into nothingness. Urgent messages sat completely ignored. Someone eventually drove over for a welfare check. Stepping past the threshold to witness the absolute devastation inside, they felt the horrifying truth slam into them with crushing force. This vibrant senior had not wandered off. She was stolen. The perpetrator meticulously ensured the victim possessed zero communication methods, leaving her fundamentally defenseless against a fatal medical emergency. Time evaporated rapidly. With every agonizing minute that slipped away, the statistical probability of a safe recovery plummeted disastrously. So the burning question remained: who orchestrated this nightmare? February 2nd, 2026, daylight. A visitor stepped inside the residence and instantly sensed absolute dread. Law enforcement stubbornly withheld the true identity of the initial eyewitness. Anonymous leaks pointed toward a frantic relative. Alternative whispers claimed a concerned neighbor simply peeked through the blinds. Regardless of their identity, pure terror greeted them. A gaping entryway, life-sustaining machinery tossed aside, shattered lenses, crimson splatters, and a glaring absence where a grandmother should be. 911 received frantic pleas. Tucson patrol cruisers flooded the block moments later. Evidence quickly eradicated any lingering hope. This was not a confused wanderer. This was a calculated theater of malicious human violence. Uniforms locked down the perimeter. Flashbulbs illuminated a grim reality, capturing the macabre smears, ruined technology, and that hauntingly unlatched portal. Technicians swabbed every surface. Forensic experts bagged trace materials. Detectives scoured the frames for splintered wood or shattered glass, desperate to understand the breach. Then the authorities stumbled upon a truly paralyzing detail. Everything remained intact. Zero damage. Locks uncompromised. No jimmying marks anywhere. As evidence suggested, the predator either possessed a spare key or received a personal invitation inside. Let that horrifying reality sink in. An 84-year-old widow living in solitude willingly unbolted her sanctuary after dark. Alternatively, the Phantom simply let themselves right into her personal space. Both theories funnel down to one sickening truth. She recognized the monster standing on her porch. Detectives hastily flooded the surrounding streets, knocking on doors as the initial golden hours ticked away into nothingness. Uniforms questioned every resident, fishing for whispers of suspicious activity from the previous dusk. Idling sedans, shadowy figures, any disruption to the suburban peace. Yet this community practically slept through life. Curfews were early here. If violence erupted under the moonlight, the street lay oblivious. Despite the frustrating silence, exhausted detectives pushed forward. Warrants secured adjacent ring cameras. They desperately prayed a neighbor's lens captured the ghosts that Nancy's equipment missed. An investigative chronology began taking shape. Brutal interrogations commenced, and one undeniable thread dragged law enforcement directly toward the doorstep of Tommaso Cione. detectives harbored a grim certainty. He was the final human contact with the victim. He occupied her living room hours before the erasure. He carried keys. He wielded total legal dominance over every single penny in her bank accounts. Suddenly, the matriarch is entirely erased. Bloody chaos remains behind. Detectives naturally made the call. They needed a friendly chat. Authorities requested his presence downtown, hoping he could map out those final hours. They needed psychological context regarding the 84-year-old's emotional baseline. Did she voice any creeping paranoia? Was the atmosphere tense? Yet the suspect refused the invitation. He completely dodged the interrogation room. Instead, his next move practically paralyzed the precinct. The son-in-law lawyered up with a high-powered shark. The silence became absolute. We must examine the prime suspect. Regardless of your stance on his ultimate culpability, this man anchors the entire mystery. 63 years old, a career intellectual, a polished university educator who purposefully buried his entire existence inside the quiet safety of academic literature. An Italian immigrant, highly articulate and frighteningly brilliant. He wed the victim's own blood, Nancy Guthrie. He integrated perfectly. This was no random drifter stalking the elderly woman from the shadows of the street. He was literally family, a trusted confidant, and that was the first devastating mistake. The educator maintained absolute fiduciary control over her estate. He possessed the unchecked legal clearance to drain savings, liquidate properties, and manipulate vast wealth entirely without her ongoing supervision. Ostensibly, this seems normal. Countless households implement similar protocols to shield their deteriorating elders. Yet, it gifted him unmitigated power, ultimate dominion. And within cold cases, absolute power invariably breeds pure tragedy. Detectives slowly synthesized a timeline. Following the mysterious abduction, digital records proved the suspect visited her quiet estate late on February 1st. A standard rideshare dropped him off. He lingered for an extended period, escaping later through another hired car. Rideshare receipts locked down the absolute timeline. They pinpointed his exact arrival and his precise departure. A gaping hole remained. No one knew what transpired in the dark hours between. Detectives pressed him, but he completely shut them out. He wasn't screaming or fighting in the interrogation room. He sat quietly. His lawyer had instructed him to keep his mouth utterly shut. The law protects that silence. Any citizen can refuse an interrogation. Nobody is forced to give the authorities a single word. Pleading the fifth isn't an admission of murder. It just paints a massive target on your back. Especially when an 84-year-old grandmother vanishes into thin air, and you were her final visitor. The community began to turn on him. Internet detectives tore his life apart. They uncovered his university degrees, scrutinized his classroom past, and dissected his entire marriage to Annie. The forums exploded with theories. Why the sudden silence? What terrifying secret was he protecting? An innocent man would normally scream his innocence. We have to step back. That was their first mistake. Assuming silence meant he had blood on his hands is a dangerous game. Innocent people demand legal counsel during catastrophic tragedies every single day for perfectly valid reasons. Terrified of a wrongful conviction, afraid of a slipped word, desperate to avoid taking the fall. When wealthy dynasties are involved, that paranoia is completely justified. Detectives followed the physical trail anyway, and every single clue pointed right back to his doorstep. He possessed the keys to her sanctuary. He walked her halls just hours before the nightmare began. He controlled her entire fortune. Official sources indicated investigators raided his private residence mere days after Nancy was swallowed by the dark. Authorities served a massive, unannounced warrant. Crime scene techs tore through his belongings to find a link. They hunted for discarded garments, hidden clues, or any roadmap to her location. The exact inventory of that raid remains deeply classified. Yet the sheer scale of the raid revealed exactly who law enforcement believed was truly responsible. Tommaso Cioni became the primary focus. Society had already convicted him, but a glaring legal chasm exists between being scrutinized and being accused. One involves handcuffs. The other is pure conjecture. Detectives never formally labeled him a suspect, and they never slapped cuffs on him. No indictments were ever filed. Decades later, the system has completely failed to link him criminally to the horrifying vanishing of Nancy Guthrie. The result was paralyzing. A silent man, a silenced victim, a shattered family trapped in the agonizing void between hope and total despair. Because, while the task force obsessed over him, time was bleeding out. Nancy remained lost in the shadows. But just as the department felt confident, a single piece of paper shattered their reality. On February 2nd, the very day they realized she was gone, a sinister letter materialized. Actually, 3 letters arrived. Process that chilling detail. 3 distinct demands for digital currency. They all claimed to hold Nancy captive, promising immediate execution if unpaid. But nobody knew yet how staged it all was. Extortion demands are incredibly rare here. Most kidnappings of vulnerable senior citizens simply do not involve sophisticated financial ultimatums. They are explosive emotional outbursts, crimes of sheer convenience, or far more devastatingly, brutal encounters disguised as sudden disappearances. A payoff points toward cold, calculated greed. Evidence suggested the attacker coveted wealth far more than they desired her suffering. The instructions were surgical. They required cryptocurrency, an invisible digital asset designed to mask the receiver's identity completely. Strict countdowns were established. They guaranteed horrific consequences if the family failed. The phrasing felt deeply personal. Evidence suggested the writer studied Nancy intimately, understood her relatives, and knew exactly where to twist the knife. Then the central mystery unraveled further. Detectives suspected the letters were entirely fabricated. The psychological profile was completely wrong. The vocabulary felt forced. The ultimatums contradicted themselves. Worst of all, they lacked any proof she still breathed. Real abductors act differently. Hostage takers always offer proof of life. A recent Polaroid, a blurry video clip, a trembling voice recording on a cassette. They need to show they hold the prize. These pages offered nothing but empty terror and greedy extortion. Law enforcement stared down an impossible, agonizing choice. Should they treat this as a genuine hostage crisis and pay up? Or were these letters just a massive theatrical distraction? A mirage designed to bury the real truth. They gambled on the distraction theory. The alarming crime scene in her mansion told a completely different story. Shattered surveillance lenses, a violently severed heart monitor, a chilling trail of red. Those were markers of a brutal encounter, not a business deal. Professional mercenaries wanting cash ruthlessly protect their investments. They absolutely do not tear out life-saving medical devices. They don't leave alarming trails of red. They only obliterate cameras if the extortion plot is a complete lie. Unless a killer is desperately staging a fake abduction to mask a heinous act. The task force aggressively pivoted to this dark reality. Forensics ripped apart the penmanship, the linguistics, and the drop-off logistics. Cyber units began hunting the phantom digital wallets in the dark web. Investigators hunted for any microscopic link between the chilling extortion letters and their usual suspects. Then came a cinematic twist ripped straight from a thriller. Authorities arrested a suspect tied directly to the demands. But the charge wasn't abduction. It was unadulterated fraud. Evidence suggested the author never actually held Nancy captive. A predatory grifter was simply weaponizing a nightmare for a quick payday. They spotted a sensationalized missing woman, sensed unimaginable vulnerability, and callously moved in. It was utterly reprehensible, but ultimately, it was a terrifyingly empty dead end. While local police wasted days chasing a phantom, the haunting central mystery echoed in empty rooms. Where was Nancy Guthrie? The letters were merely smoke. It was a brutal, orchestrated diversion. And while a fractured system fumbled through the noise, her golden window for survival simply vanished. Authorities had to pivot. They retraced their steps back to the corrupted crime scene, straight toward the one soul hiding the truth. Straight back to Tommaso Cian, February 2026. Weeks into a stagnant inquiry, federal agents triggered a shockwave. They leaked home security video pulled straight from Nancy's porch. What materialized was pure nightmare fuel. A masked shadow slipped through the pitch-black yard with predatory, surgical precision. This intruder wasn't stumbling around clumsily. They certainly weren't acting out of blind panic. This was a ghost executing a flawless operation. The pixelated video was heavily degraded. Residential lenses lack Hollywood resolution, yet the fundamentals were undeniable. Dark garments draped the phantom. Heavy gloves swallowed their fingerprints. They stalked toward Nancy's sanctuary, targeting the lens itself. Then, total darkness, because those devices were violently shattered. Whoever this monster was, They possessed intimate knowledge of her security system. They understood the surveillance needed blinding, and they crushed it. But that was their first mistake. Federal technicians successfully extracted the hidden digital cache. Despite the catastrophic physical damage, the digital memory miraculously survived intact. That ghostly file handed detectives their maiden glimpse of a predator. The agonizing reality? Facial recognition was totally impossible. Heavy disguises and suffocating shadows formed an impenetrable shield. Gender remained a mystery. Hair and distinct features were entirely swallowed. The skewed perspective meant investigators couldn't confidently establish a rough height or build. Yet, the sheer malice was palpable. The intricate, cold-blooded planning was glaringly obvious to everyone watching. Authorities broadcasted the nightmare nationwide, praying someone might catch an anomaly, a strange limp, or a specific jacket. They begged for witnesses who spotted a lurker that fateful night. They desperately needed an influx of leads to jumpstart the case. And the strategy worked. The hotline exploded with frantic callers. Neighbors flooded the switchboards, pouring out wild theories and deep-seated paranoias, yet the majority hit brick walls. Because, without an exposed face or a distinct physical marker, linking that terrifying silhouette to a living human was functionally impossible. Still, that corrupted video screamed one unavoidable truth. This was heavily premeditated. Nancy wasn't snatched by a random opportunist. They orchestrated a masterpiece of terror. They possessed lethal competence. And that reality dragged everyone back to the ultimate question. Who possessed such intimate clearance? Who navigated her private sanctuary blindly, dodging lenses? Who had the time to map this? Every single shred of logic kept aiming directly at one very specific target. Yet, instinct and admissible proof are different beasts. Without biological traces cementing a suspect to the scene, justice remained paralyzed. That shattered porch camera evolved into the absolute center of the investigation. Anchors looped it endlessly. Behavioral analysts scrutinized the movements. Armchair detectives aggressively ripped apart every pixel online. Millions were hunting for a singular slip-up that would shatter the mystery. But the silence remained absolute. Nancy Guthrie was still a ghost. The faceless monster remained entirely free, and a desperate system kept blindly digging through the ashes for a miracle. February 10th, 2026. Exactly 9 days since Nancy evaporated. Suddenly, the case violently shifted. Tommaso Cione was abruptly detained. Detained, mind you, not officially arrested. Cuffs require rock-solid charges. This tactical hold merely allowed for aggressive interrogation. They had enough heat to corner him, but lacked the silver bullet. The takedown was deceptively simple. Cruisers boxed Tommaso in during a routine stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, 60 miles south of Tucson. He was behind the wheel, and he was totally alone. The second dispatch ran his plates. Flags erupted. Tommaso Cione was burned into the brain of every Arizona patrolman. They threw him in a unit, no cinematic slam, just a quiet extraction for a highly anticipated conversation. For the first time since the tragedy, detectives trapped Tommaso in a room where he couldn't just vanish. But nobody knew yet how stonewalled they'd be. He refused to utter a single word while his attorney watched the clock. Acting on strict legal counsel, Tommaso invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege to stay completely quiet. He refused to utter a single syllable regarding the evening Nancy vanished. No alibi was given. He suggested no alternate suspects. He remained a stone wall while detectives deployed every interrogation tactic. Nothing penetrated his armor. That was the first mistake. After grueling hours, they let him walk. No formal charges, no handcuffs, just freedom. Because without physical traces connecting him to Nancy's vanishing, detectives legally could not hold him. Yet, that brief captivity revealed a critical detail. Authorities firmly believed Tommaso knew the truth. They suspected his involvement. They simply lacked the proof. Now, the nightmare was about to grow infinitely more convoluted. While he sat detained, authorities executed an additional search warrant. This raid targeted a property tied to Tommaso. Media sources indicated the target was a Rio Rico dwelling, potentially owned by a relative. Insiders claimed it was his mother-in-law's house, though facts remained shrouded in shadow. What were detectives hunting? Any microscopic thread tying him to Nancy's vanishing. Garments harboring blood evidence, hidden financial ledgers, or encrypted devices. Any artifact proving a motive, method, or opening. Whatever secrets they unearthed there remain entirely sealed away. Yet their relentless pursuit, their constant unearthing of dirt, confirmed this grueling manhunt was nowhere near finished. That February 10th captivity was a monumental turning point. It provided the initial public validation that Tommaso was beyond a mere person of interest. He was targeted, maybe not formally, perhaps absent from legal filings, but to seasoned detectives and a hungry public, he became the ultimate villain, fueling a rabid press. Front pages roared about the stone-cold son-in-law refusing to speak. Network broadcasts analyzed his routines. Internet sleuths detonated comment sections with wild conspiracies. Half the country believed he was a monster. Others insisted the system framed a convenient scapegoat, simply because he was the final soul to witness Nancy breathing. Yet we could not ignore one glaring detail: his absolute muteness. In a deadly vanishing, quietness screams. If your hands are clean, if no skeletons exist, why refuse to help? Why hinder the hunt for a loved one? The defense was straightforward. Evidence suggested our judicial machine fundamentally fails the innocent. Because blameless citizens rot behind bars. Because once authorities lock onto your scent, escaping their crosshairs becomes practically impossible. In a media circus of this magnitude, a single misplaced syllable could completely obliterate your existence. Consequently, Tommaso kept his mouth shut, and Nancy remained a ghost. Following his discharge, he retreated home. No prison cell, no ankle monitor. He was free to resume his routine. But unseen eyes followed him. Detectives kept him under surveillance. News crews stalked him, and the nation condemned him in the court of public opinion. Because until Nancy Guthrie surfaced, until handcuffs clicked, Tommaso Cione would remain the sinister villain everyone feared. Yet nobody possessed the forensic ammunition to legally convict. While detectives hunted phantoms and journalists picked the corpse clean, a secondary tragedy brewed in the shadows. A silent agony. The absolute implosion of a shattered bloodline. Nancy Guthrie had 5 children. One was Savannah Guthrie, the famous co-host anchoring the NBC Today broadcast. She was an iconic fixture within American broadcast journalism. For decades, Savannah served as the trusted voice delivering tragedies to the masses. Now, she was living it. On February 3rd, 2026, barely 48 hours following her mother's vanishing, Savannah faced a lens. Yet she wasn't reciting network copy. She wasn't conducting a celebrity interview. She was begging for her mother's survival. The footage was brutally stripped down. Absolute terror practically bled through her exhausted eyes and trembling vocals. The polished anchor persona vanished. She was a shattered daughter, paralyzed by dread. "Please," she begged, her vocal cords fracturing. "If any citizen holds a clue about my mom, if you possess a location, if you witnessed anything, I implore you to step forward." She requires vital prescriptions. She relies on a cardiac pacemaker. She needs a savior. That broadcast sliced directly through the usual media chatter. It served as a brutal reminder that missing persons aren't mere entertainment. Nancy was a loved matriarch, a devoted grandmother, a breathing soul. Savannah triggered an indefinite sabbatical from her network morning desk. She halted her broadcast obligations, abandoned the studio lights, and poured her soul into the manhunt. She wasn't alone. Her siblings mobilized for war. They orchestrated grid searches. They strategized alongside detectives. They plastered massive advertisements throughout Tucson, across Arizona, and spanning the entire nation. Nancy's haunting portrait glared from interstate overpasses and transit stations, silently begging a singular inquiry to the public. Has anyone spotted this woman? The family funded a massive bounty, $50,000 for a tip revealing Nancy's location. Federal agents matched it. $100,000 sat unclaimed, yielding absolute silence. But nobody knew yet how fractured this clan would become. A family member was the primary target. Annie Guthrie, Nancy's flesh, Savannah's sister, was legally bound to Tommaso. Therefore, while her relatives begged for the truth, Annie found herself trapped in a psychological torture chamber. Would she defend her spouse? Did she actually believe his hands were clean? Or does she secretly align with detectives? Evidence suggested Tommaso hides a darker truth. We still remain completely in the dark. Because Annie, much like Tommaso, maintains a chilling silence. No media interviews. Zero public statements ever given. She is suffocating between marital loyalty and a daughter's grief. That was the first mistake in this unfolding tragedy. Because regardless of the final verdict, this bloodline is irrevocably shattered. If Tommaso is guilty, she loses absolutely everything overnight. If innocent, they wasted agonizing months chasing ghosts, while the actual monster roamed completely free, an intensely chilling, unresolved thought. Their desperate pleas remind everyone what truly hangs in the balance. This is no longer simply about solving cold crimes. It actively involves bringing a vanished victim home, securing much-needed family closure, finding an 84-year-old mother who deserved unconditional safety, profound care, and salvation. But nobody knew yet what horrific twist was coming. But as agonizing days stretch into weeks, and February cruelly bleeds into March, remaining hope violently evaporates. Because with every single passing hour she remains vanished, survival odds rapidly plummet toward zero. That is the terrifying, grim reality nobody dares to confront. Nancy Guthrie vanishing without a trace is not merely local news, nor is it standard national reporting. It spirals into a massive political firestorm. When a legendary American journalist's mother suddenly vanishes, the highest governmental powers violently take notice. President Donald Trump, inaugurated merely weeks before this deeply unsettling disappearance, was immediately cornered during a formal press briefing. His response was incredibly swift. "A horrific situation," he declared. "Truly horrific. We will deploy every possible asset to locate her. Federal authorities are involved. Massive resources are officially flowing into this. We must bring her back." It sparked a remarkably rare moment of bipartisan unity, because regardless of political affiliations, regardless of public opinions surrounding Savannah Guthrie's controversial journalism, everyone universally agreed an 84-year-old woman remained dangerously lost and required urgent rescuing. The White House immediately weaponized massive federal investigative resources. Official reports confirmed federal agents, already probing, drastically escalated operations. Elite teams aggressively deployed. Advanced forensic units completely swarmed in. This nightmare instantly escalated from a quiet local search into an absolute top-tier federal priority. That shift matters immensely. Federal backing unleashes extreme manpower, cutting-edge technology, and vast resources. They accessed encrypted databases and advanced surveillance networks local cops only dreamed about. It ensured this mystery would never fade, buried underneath thousands of unrelated cold case files. But it brought crushing pressure, intense media scrutiny, millions watching every single calculated move those exhausted detectives made. White House interference proved both a blessing and a terrifying curse. It kept her case headlining, guaranteeing resources flowed freely. But that massive exposure transformed the delicate hunt into a brutal media spectacle. Pundits brutally analyzed every development. Critics aggressively attacked every misstep. The grieving family, already drowning in unimaginable emotional distress, was shoved violently into the blinding public spotlight. Yet the core message remained undeniably clear. Locating Nancy Guthrie was absolutely paramount, and federal authorities swore to deliver justice. But witness this brutal reality. Infinite global resources mean absolutely nothing without hard physical evidence. All that specialized manpower, all that cutting-edge technology, all that overwhelming political willpower proves completely worthless unless detectives uncover that one hidden thread designed to finally shatter this mystery wide open. And so far, they possessed absolutely nothing. The aggressive presidential response simply highlighted her immense significance. She was never just a missing victim. She held direct ties to immense power, heavy influence, and untouchable elites. Logically, that should provide a massive tactical advantage. But this undeniable systemic failure sparks deeply uncomfortable questions. Would this investigation receive such intense focus without her famous bloodline? Would federal agents aggressively intervene? Would presidents comment? History violently suggests otherwise. This perfectly highlights the justice system's toxic reality. Certain missing victims demand global attention. Others simply fade away. The ultimate difference usually depends on your personal contacts. Nancy held extreme systemic privilege, yet all that fabricated luck completely abandoned her in the end. While detectives secretly scrambled in the shadows and journalists exploited every possible angle, Tucson residents rallied. They did what fractured communities always do. They fiercely united. Vigils rapidly multiplied. Dozens gathered outside St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church, where she had faithfully worshipped for decades. Flickering candles violently pierced the darkness. Whispered prayers echoed endlessly. Close friends and total strangers converged, holding sacred space for a vanished mother brutally silenced by the terrifying unknown. Desperate search parties mobilized. Volunteers ruthlessly combed through jagged desert terrain. They scoured desolate parks, hunting isolated zones where killers hide bodies or destroy forensic evidence. Truly grueling work. That unforgiving Arizona wasteland is notoriously brutal. Scorching, vast, and packed with terrifying expanses where someone could simply vanish forever. But the community completely refused to surrender. They relentlessly hunted, clung to hope. Local shopkeepers plastered urgent flyers everywhere. Her face stared from frosted shop windows, cluttered community boards, grocery aisles. The haunting message was impossibly simple. Have you seen this missing woman? Contact the tip line immediately. And the panicked public flooded those lines. Hundreds of tips poured in. Some seemed legitimate citizens claiming they spotted her or witnessed profoundly suspicious activity. Others proved actively destructive, rampant conspiracy theories, and completely false sightings. Predators desperately injected themselves into this high-profile nightmare. Exhausted detectives meticulously dissected every lie. Someone holds the truth. Speak up. Police must chase every single shadow, no matter how bizarre, since that overlooked clue might hold the absolute truth. Tucson locals also step up financially, demanding immediate answers. Massive fundraisers kick off to back the desperate search, keeping kind-hearted Nancy's mystery entirely unavoidable. Billboards drain cash. Rewards cost an absolute fortune, and though her family holds wealth, neighbors demand to share this heavy load. It proves that during our absolute blackest hours, humanity can still showcase a truly stunning grace. Yet a very sinister shadow creeps into this local response. Because when women vanish entirely, paranoia breeds quickly. Friendly neighbors suddenly trade cold glances, whispers echo, wild theories ignite, accusations fly. And naturally, Tommaso Cian, residing nearby, morphs into public enemy number one. Locals recognize him. Glares linger. Bold folks confront him directly. Others simply lurk in shadows, praying he makes a mistake. This twisted street justice never actually brings peace. It only breeds raw agony, deep societal fractures, and incredibly suffocating terror. However, this intense public obsession keeps Nancy's ghost alive. Detectives constantly feel the heat. It guarantees her tragedy escapes gathering dust inside a forgotten police basement. Because Tucson residents absolutely refuse to let sweet Nancy fade into the darkness. They demand to find her. They crave real answers. They scream for justice. And they absolutely will not quit until victory. Let's critically analyze the clues. Because the deeper you dig into this nightmare, the more reality completely falls apart. Begin with that pacemaker. Her medical device was completely disconnected and abandoned. That never happens by simple accident. That represents calculated malice. Evidence suggested someone knew exactly what kept her heart beating, then brutally chose to stop it. But nobody knew yet why they left it. If your goal is making someone vanish seamlessly, why abandon glaring proof of foul play? Why not just snatch the device, trash it somewhere remote, and pretend this beloved woman simply wandered away? Unless you desperately wanted terrified cops to uncover a crime. Unless you wanted to broadcast a warning. Then consider the blood, a chilling crimson trail dragging toward the back exit. Yet, mysteriously, it was not a massive pool of red. It lacked the sheer volume typical of brutal slaughters. Evidence suggested merely an injury, a chaotic scuffle, or a hard fall. What does that mean? Was sweet Nancy wounded but still breathing during her abduction? Was this scene completely fabricated? Did someone else bleed there? According to state forensics, DNA matched Nancy. We realize she suffered harm, yet we can only blindly guess the severity. We cannot determine if she perished instantly or remains trapped somewhere, fighting to survive without rescue. That was the first mistake. Next, the ruined cameras. This phantom completely understood her security layout. They ruthlessly smashed the lenses. Yet, a massive, glaring blind spot remained. They missed one vital piece. The porch lens, capturing a terrifying masked silhouette, survived just long enough to trap their dark image. Was leaving it a sloppy blunder? Did our suspect panic? Or did they just arrogantly assume the grainy pixels could never positively identify their hidden face? Then consider her loyal dog, who remained dead silent. Canines typically alert at strangers. They growl at immediate threats. They react to bizarre noises. Yet midnight brought absolute quiet. That implies two realities. Either the pet easily recognized the shadowy figure, or the intruder completely mastered canine pacification. Both deeply unsettling scenarios strongly suggest the predator intimately knew Nancy's private sanctuary. Now, consider those deeply disturbing extortion demands. 3 distinct letters, all begging for untraceable Bitcoin, all promising her execution. However, seasoned detectives call their bluff. They scream misdirection. So, who mailed them? A greedy monster exploiting pure tragedy for quick cash? Or a brilliant mastermind throwing feds off the scent? The suspect, eventually handcuffed for mailing them, lacked any ties to Nancy. He was merely a pathetic, opportunistic fraud. But that sparks another glaring dilemma. If those digital threats were bogus, why even bother executing them? Why risk decades behind bars for an obviously doomed financial scam? Unless those letters masked another truth. Unless they purchased the killer precious hours. Time to sanitize crime scenes, melt away weapons, and practice lies. Furthermore, dissect that impossible timeline. Tommaso exits Nancy's residence late on February 1st. He hails a rideshare home. Nancy remains unprotected. Sometime between the witching hour and breaking dawn, she violently fades into nothingness. But here is the massive logical failure. Assuming Tommaso committed this absolute evil, how did he creep back? Rideshare logs prove he arrived home. Did he hail another ride? Did he drive? Walk? Detectives aggressively checked every avenue, finding nothing. Zero proof exists of Tommaso visiting her sanctuary before dawn. No ride shares, no transit, no cabs. His vehicle simply remained parked at home. Either he discovered a genius alternate route that evaded all modern digital surveillance, or another sinister accomplice pulled the strings. Or he never originally left. Perhaps transit logs contain flaws. Maybe he faked leaving, watched his driver speed away, and then crept silently right back indoors. Yet, that remains pure guesswork. Systemic failures thrive on guesswork. Hard facts win. Currently, physical clues scream toward entirely different, heavily contradictory directions. Nothing sticks. Detectives are hitting massive, devastating brick walls. Meanwhile, Nancy remains vanished. When investigations rot away this long, bizarre urban legends heavily multiply. Some originate directly from absolute terrifying reality. The rest is just pure speculation. Yet, they all share a desperate hunger to find reason in a nightmare, completely defying logic. This remains the dominant narrative, the one society clings to. Its cold logic feels straightforward. Tommaso saw her last. He possessed her house keys, and he entirely controlled her financial empire. He stonewalls detectives. And the physical remnants shattered security lenses, a deliberately silenced heart monitor. With absolutely zero signs of forced entry, point toward an intruder who intimately understood her routines. They knew her deepest vulnerabilities. The motive was cash. With Nancy erased, Tommaso stood to legally inherit or strictly dominate her vast assets. Greed breeding brutal violence is an ancient story. But that was the first mistake in trusting this neat narrative. Detectives lacked any DNA evidence. No confessions dropped, and absolutely zero physical proof tied Tommaso to the house when she vanished. Without hard forensics, it remains mere suspicion. This is the exact loophole his defenders champion. They claim he is a convenient scapegoat. He was nearby and held access, making him the absolute perfect target for police. But what if a serial killer knew this? What if a phantom used his proximity to mask their own strike? Perhaps a hidden enemy held a deep grudge. Maybe a different predator coveted her wealth. Someone could have lurked until Tommaso departed, striking only when the perfect frame-up was strictly guaranteed. It is a plausible scenario, though it demands staggering logistical precision. Plus, it entirely fails to explain why Tommaso aggressively dodges basic police questioning. If innocent, why refuse help? Detectives briefly entertained this alternative angle before tossing it into the cold case files. They wondered if this vibrant 84-year-old simply wandered out her front door into the suffocating darkness. Perhaps a sudden medical crisis hit. Yet, as evidence suggested, Wandering does not explain shattered lenses, a disabled implant, or a chilling trail of blood. Those brutal details contradict a nighttime stroll. Her fiercely protective relatives maintain she never showed signs of cognitive decline. She was relentlessly sharp. So, while technically feasible, the accident theory feels hollow. Could a nameless drifter have done the unthinkable? A total stranger might have targeted and snatched her. The glaring issue here is the intact locks. The predator who breached her walls either possessed a key or earned a smile at the door, actions destroying the random drifter profile. Blinding the security cameras took serious premeditation. Knowing exactly how to disable her medical device screams of betrayal. Yet, the darkest possibilities linger. A stalker could have spent weeks mapping routines, holding breath for the strike. A monster wrapped in a delivery uniform. They could have faked utility credentials, manipulating her gentle trust to gain entry. But again, the forensic files remain entirely empty. Nobody saw a thing, and dispatch logs show zero strange activities before she vanished. Still, her desperate family holds on to a singular, agonizing thread that she is caged alive somewhere, praying for a heroic rescue. We missed one detail. The nightmare persists. Without a corpse or forensic certainty of murder, that tiny ember burns. Perhaps her captor is preserving her for a twisted purpose. They could be biding time, demanding a massive cash drop, hoping for a clean window to release. But sunlight fades quickly when the victim is 84. Her heart is failing. She is surviving without her critical pills. Without her implant, survival odds drop to 0. The vicious rumors multiply. Wild speculation spins, and the true story stays buried. Because until a suspect breaks, until fresh forensics drop, until she is located, we blindly guess. Her vanishing mutated past a standard broadcast. It became a monstrous true crime obsession, bringing devastating collateral damage. Within 48 hours, her face blanketed the nation. Anchor desks obsessed constantly. Armchair detectives tore apart every microscopic clue online, hunting a ghost. Digital mobs launched wild accusations and waged online witch hunts. Trapped in the very eye of this hurricane stood Savannah, a veteran reporter who built a legacy broadcasting strangers' nightmares, suddenly forced into her own. The press swarm lacked mercy. Flashing lenses permanently choked their front lawn. Vultures hunted down dead ends, harassed, terrified locals, and ripped through Tommaso's history. The slightest rumor instantly became headlines. Sure, massive exposure sometimes forces the broken system's hand. It keeps names alive and shakes loose witnesses. It suffocates detectives with pressure, yet the blowback remains toxic. Broadcasts rarely stick to facts, they monetize speculation. Blood becomes profit. It warps grief into popcorn entertainment. Banners blaze. Relative stonewalls. Did Tommaso do it? The dark enigma behind Nancy's vanishing. With every viral post, fundamental constitutional rights erode. Tommaso was never officially indicted. He never saw the inside of a courtroom. He was just a convenient target. Yet, on the digital streets, they had already built his gallows. That is the fatal flaw. Newsrooms play God, gavel, and hangman. Once the furious mob writes your wrongful conviction, surviving is nearly impossible. But the media circus breeds a darker threat. It actively chokes the hunt. Reporters swarm the active crime scene, erasing vital clues. They corner terrified witnesses long before detectives can, tainting memories. Headlines leak classified details detectives needed hidden, handing prime suspects a roadmap they shouldn't have. It is a razor-thin line. Detectives need the media to spark fresh leads and pressure the guilty, but they simultaneously beg the cameras to retreat, to let them execute their actual jobs without any interference. In Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, that boundary fractures. Savannah Guthrie, for her part, navigates the impossible. As a beloved public figure, escaping the glaring spotlight is impossible. Yet she remains a heartbroken daughter, begging for quiet space to grieve, search, and hope. She issues statements only via her attorney. She demands total privacy. She begs the press to focus on finding her beloved mother, not on cheap spectacle, but the press ignores her pleas. As brutal tragedy and dark mystery sell, and a missing mother tied to a famous anchor is absolute television gold. The circus escalates, cameras keep rolling, headlines multiply, and somewhere in the chaos, an 84-year-old woman is tragically missing. The media's role in this nightmare is dangerously complex. It can be a righteous force, amplifying awareness, unearthing leads, and demanding action. But it can rapidly become a destructive weapon, shattering boundaries with lies, turning human ruin to pure spectacle. In Nancy's chilling case, it is both. Far beyond the flashing cameras and wild public theories, detectives execute the grueling, methodical science of forensics. In these devastating mysteries, forensic science is everything. Let us begin with the blood. Nancy's blood was discovered at the crime scene, forming a grim trail toward the rear exit. Techs harvest the samples, run rapid DNA screens, and verify the tragic match, but they also scrutinize the spatter. Drops hold dark secrets. It reveals exactly how the violence unfolded, whether a clumsy fall, a blunt force strike, or a desperate struggle. It maps the panic. It can even construct a terrifying timeline. In Nancy's home, evidence suggested movement. A victim, presumed to be Nancy, was traveling toward the rear exit. The fluid was not pooled, ruling out her simply collapsing. It formed a sickening trail, proving she was either staggering or dragged. But science has a blind spot. It cannot reveal if she was awake, if she was violently coerced, or if she walked out under fatal duress. Detectives then pivot to pulverized security cameras. They hunt for latent prints, microscopic DNA, or any stray trace to unmask the phantom. But this predator was calculated. They wore heavy gloves, they left nothing. Yet the broken hardware itself whispered a few vital, dark clues. The specific way they were obliterated, the sheer kinetic force, and the strike angle told profilers about this monster. Their exact height, brutal strength, and terrifying rage. Then, the discarded pacemaker went straight to labs. Technicians scoured it for smudged prints, stray cells, or hints, but nobody knew yet how meticulous this killer was. 0 prints, 0 genetic material. Still, the medical device held ghosts. Modern implants log erratic heart rhythms, exact timestamps, and activity spikes. Cyber experts pinpointed the very second the wire was severed. They tracked Nancy's final heartbeats in the seconds before the cut. Logs revealed her extreme psychological stress, a pulse racing in absolute terror. That cold data forged a timeline anchor. It handed detectives the exact, chilling minute Nancy's life plunged into jeopardy. Detectives dissected the surviving doorbell video, frame by agonizing frame. They hunted for a single flaw, to betray the masked shadow, a faded clothing logo, a loping gait, or a faint, jagged scar. Federal experts deployed algorithms to sharpen the dark pixels, but this intruder was far too layered, far too cautious of the lens. Yet, forensic imaging still surrendered secrets. Specialists calculated an exact height and build by comparing the shadow to porch pillars. They mapped the intruder's erratic movements, praying to spot a fatal flaw. Then came the digital autopsy. Detectives ripped through server logs, texts, and buried emails. They searched desperately for hidden links tying Nancy to her predator. Records were combed for sudden payouts. They tore into Tommaso's personal cell and his laptop, tracing every step of his footprint. They hunted the darkest queries: how to silence a pacemaker, dissolve remains, or completely vanish. If those damning keystrokes exist, authorities kept them buried. Without them, the task force holds an open wound. Hunches are just whispers. Science is a powerful tool, but it is not a crystal ball. For Nancy Guthrie, the system is failing. Weeks have bled away, and despite massive funding, relentless news cycles, and endless lab hours, we are drowning in terrifying shadows. One central, agonizing mystery echoes constantly throughout the community. Is she breathing? Is she trapped in a lightless room? Or did she meet a horrific end in the desert? 0 confirmed sightings, no biological traces. Without a physical form to anchor this nightmare, detectives are stumbling blindly. Public records confirm Tommaso was inside Nancy's house on the night of February 1st. He booked a rideshare. Somewhere in the crushing silence after that car pulled away, Nancy vanished. What actually happened? Did a stranger slip through the door? Did Tommaso circle back? Or did she leave alone? The timeline is fractured. Inside those missing hours is where a monster hides, but nobody knew yet how deep the deception went. An innocent man usually screams for help, yet Tommaso remains entirely mute. Pleading the fifth is constitutional, but chilling. His silence is a suffocating blanket over the truth. Worse still, authorities arrested a different suspect for mailing fabricated extortion letters. A sickening twist. Was that grifter operating solo? Or did this suspect share a sinister, unseen link? Maybe it was just a sick cash grab. But if those demands were purely theatrical, who were they distracting? Federal agents dropped a bombshell tape of a masked phantom. Is it Tommaso beneath the disguise? A hired ghost? Does it even tie back to Nancy? Perhaps it was filmed on a completely unrelated evening. The grainy video is a bureaucratic tease, injecting pure paranoia. Evidence suggested foul play, but the fundamental driving force, greed, violent retribution, or something sicker remains dangerously absent. Maybe she knew a secret that demanded permanent silence. Unlocking the psychological trigger usually breaks homicides wide open. Not here. Law enforcement always plays a calculated game of keep away. They bury critical facts, secrets exclusively known by the perpetrator. That was the first mistake for armchair detectives. Those truths bait killers. Do the feds possess a smoking gun kept off the record, a golden thread leading straight to the culprit? Or is the systemic failure absolute? It is the absolute darkest thought imaginable, whispering through the broken community as days turn into agonizing, silent weeks. The trail turns to ice. Biological traces rot away into dust. Witnesses vanish. The system moves along without her. Without a sudden admission of guilt or a recovered corpse, Nancy could become a forgotten ghost, leaving a generational wound that never scabs. The sheer horror of that outcome leaves dedicated detectives paralyzed. Her loved ones are trapped in a waking purgatory. It is a psychological torture chamber that online sleuths dissect. Until the dam breaks, her vanishing will stand as the most deeply chilling, unresolved nightmare of 2026. What happens when the spotlight burns out? As we speak, Nancy is a ghost. Tommaso Cioni walks the streets, free of any legal indictments. The files stay open on a desk, bleeding urgency. Yet, the tactical hunt refuses to completely flatline. Task forces relentlessly chase rumors down blind alleys. They grill witnesses. Everyone is praying for a single slipped sentence to shatter the deadlock. The looming horizon holds a terrifying patience. Unrelenting observation. If authorities truly suspect Tommaso orchestrated this, they are watching. They are logging his footsteps, wiretapping his digital footprint, analyzing his paranoia. They just need him to crack, guiding them to the missing woman. Lab protocols will evolve. Science marches forward, promising invisible truths. A microscopic fleck of biological material might finally sing. Blurry, useless security feeds could be artificially sharpened, revealing a face. Crime scene technicians will scour the boxes repeatedly. Terrified, they overlook the obvious. Echoes mock them. Nancy's loved ones refuse to let the bureaucracy bury her memory. They will scream her name to the press. They will drain their bank accounts. They will corner the precinct captains until somebody pays up. Should the district attorney build a bulletproof narrative, handcuffs will finally snap shut on somebody. We are talking federal abduction, homicide, or aggressively burying the truth. But slapping a felony on a civilian requires hard, undeniable science. Today, the prosecution has nothing but flimsy theories. Yet, the darkest mysteries sometimes unravel through a sheer, explosive stroke of luck. A guilt-ridden bystander finally talks, a dying man cleanses his soul, or a crucial clue emerges. Miracles are undeniably scarce. But that razor-thin optimism is the only thing keeping her mother from despair. Should the hotline stop ringing, the department will brutally archive her file. The ultimate systemic failure of cold cases. Technically, a binder on a shelf is legally open. But practically, the boots on the ground retreat, and the hunt bleeds. It is the absolute worst-case scenario. Some monsters are caught by sunrise, others evade traps forever. Demand answers, call your local authorities before she fades. Nancy Guthrie's file remains trapped in a suffocating purgatory. According to case files, evidence suggested a brutal crime took place. The crosshairs are firmly locked on one prime suspect. Yet prosecutors lack the definitive DNA evidence needed to secure a conviction, drop the hammer, and finally bring her home. A shattered family waits. The nation watches. Somewhere in the dark, a lone individual harbors the gruesome truth. Will they ever break? Nancy's vanishing act ripped the lid off a systemic rot. It exposed how broken our missing persons protocols truly are. Hundreds of thousands vanish across the United States every single year. Most are recovered swiftly runaways or adults seeking brief escapes, but thousands more are swallowed by the earth completely. Countless files gather dust, completely ignored. Why? Because Nancy is tethered to a household name. Savannah Guthrie is her daughter. The media cares, but nobody knew yet how this would highlight the voiceless victims left behind. What happens to the vulnerable seniors who evaporate from locked care facilities? Indigenous women, marginalized souls, and LGBTQ citizens vanish daily. Yet, evidence suggested their files are systematically shoved aside. This very case ignited a furious, overdue debate regarding these horrifying blind spots. Citizens began demanding answers. Why does this tragedy secure the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White House briefings, and 24/7 news cycles? The truth is deeply unsettling. Privilege dictates justice, protecting the wealthy, while wrongful convictions bury the innocent, proving the machine is rigged. That was the first mistake, assuming the system cared equally. Yet, this highlighted how fast resources move with political will. It showcased exactly what a united community can accomplish against the odds. It proved relentless journalistic pressure can absolutely refuse to let a cold case die. Detectives were issued a grim reminder. Every single stolen life demands the exact same bloodhound-level urgency. Here is the brutal reality. Nancy Guthrie desperately needs to be found, but so does every abducted child, every exploited grandparent, and every ordinary citizen who steps out their front door and ceases to exist. They demand the identical caliber of forensic scrutiny, limitless manpower, and a relentless thirst for the unvarnished truth. As investigators dug deeper, a sinister underbelly emerged. Elder abuse remains a staggering, critically underreported national epidemic. Financial vampires, physical torment, malicious neglect. According to records, it happens far more frequently than anyone dares to admit. The most terrifying part, the monsters are usually trusted caretakers or immediate blood relatives. This terrifying ordeal forced a national reckoning regarding how we shield our frailest citizens from predators. We must learn to spot the psychological tripwires before the fatal blow falls. But the lingering mystery of Nancy remains an open wound. While this investigation wields unprecedented power, it mirrors a profoundly broken reality haunting detectives. It stands as a haunting monument that every single stolen breath holds immeasurable worth. Society must demand better before the next victim vanishes. Nancy, if you are out there in the dark, against all odds, we are hunting. Your bloodline refuses to surrender. Savannah has stopped her entire world from spinning just to drag you back into the light. Your children are marching, demanding answers, and fiercely ensuring your face never slips from the front pages. Innocent grandchildren spend every waking hour praying for a miracle at the front door. The university where you poured out your soul, the pews you filled, the neighbors who cherished you, they are all holding candles in the blackness. Missing posters blanket the concrete. Your legacy burns brighter than ever. Law enforcement hasn't blinked. The Tucson Police Department and federal agents are tearing the desert apart. They are still hunting every shadow. Strangers who never knew your smile are completely consumed by the hunt. Phone lines are melting with desperate, anonymous tips. They refuse to let the trail freeze over. You matter. And the search party won't rest until the lock clicks. If a predator has you caged, unable to scream for salvation, hear this. An army is coming. Limitless financial backing is bleeding into the search grid. You have not been abandoned to the wolves. But if the unthinkable has occurred, if a serial killer struck, we'll unearth your remains. We will bring you home. We'll fiercely guarantee you receive the absolute dignity that a nameless case file can never provide. You are not a catchy headline. You are an 84-year-old matriarch who built a beautiful universe that violently shattered overnight. Your echo remains deafening. Nancy Guthrie, the hounds are loose, and we are coming for you. She vanished into thin air on February 1st, 2026. And as the sun sets today, the nightmare remains completely unresolved. Wealth, silence, a prominent family hiding secrets while the primary suspect refuses to speak. As records showed, the evidence suggested a cover-up, leaving everyone terrified. Stripped of the media circus, the dark truth remains. Finding an 84-year-old grandmother who truly deserved absolute peace. We unraveled terrifying threads throughout this entire broadcast. We explored Nancy's gentle world, the ominous hours before she vanished, glaring systemic failures, and the maddening dead ends. We heavily scrutinize the missing DNA profiles, severely flawed forensics, and relentless headlines. Her nightmare exposed devastating cracks in national missing persons protocols. But nobody knew yet how deep the rot went. Someone knows her exact location. If you hold a single clue regarding Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, immediately contact Tucson authorities or the Federal Bureau. A $100,000 reward awaits the tip bringing her home. Remain completely anonymous. Dial the secure crisis hotline. Submit tips online. Even if your memory feels totally meaningless, report it before the trail goes cold. That was the first mistake investigators made, ignoring minor details that inevitably shatter cold cases. If you walk the streets of Tucson, Arizona, in early February 2026, if you noticed a strange shadow, an unfamiliar car, or a routine feeling deeply wrong, break the silence. Listen extremely closely. If blinding guilt over Nancy's fate keeps you awake, if you helped bury the truth to shield a monster, or if that crushing secret is destroying you, redemption is still on the table today. You can absolutely still bring her home. To our loyal viewers, circulate this broadcast. Amplify Nancy's tragedy. Force the general public to remember her face. Every single share acts as a ticking clock for the guilty, increasing the odds a terrified witness will finally break. Hit subscribe if you demand true justice now. We dissect cold cases and wrongful convictions, screaming for justice, and we refuse to blink until the twisted truth surfaces. The final chapter of Nancy Guthrie's life remains unwritten. Her file stays painfully open. We will continue hunting ghosts. We keep digging. We will battle the system until she is recovered. This gentle woman earned our fight, and true justice demands action. Thank you for watching. Thank you for not looking away. Help us finally find Nancy Guthrie today.